morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Peter Valentine. I'm going to be helping move the process and facilitating the process as we move through. I can see we are around 130 people or so. I'm going to share my screen and explain a little bit what we're going to do while people are still signing in. So let me just share my screen for a second. Well, for about an hour, actually. We're going to be sharing with you for quite a long time here. So let me just share my screen. So you should be seeing, hopefully, the title. This webinar is about agricultural innovation, driving achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. We're very happy to see you here this afternoon, this morning. Let me just remind you of a few housekeeping matters before we get going. We would like it if you could please keep your videos and microphones off, unless you're one of the speakers. We are recording the whole event, including the chats, including the direct messages. So everything you say and share will be recorded. So just be aware. We're going to be using a lot of interaction using the chat as we go through the next 90 minutes. So please familiarize yourself with the chat function. And I can see some people are already posting messages, so super. We're going to be using that a lot. Simultaneous interpretation is available from English. So the main language we will be speaking is English, but you can have Spanish and you can have French. So you should be able to look at the bottom right of your Zoom screen and you will see a kind of a globe. And there you can choose another language if you would like to have another language than English. So those are the warming up questions here. Let me just introduce briefly ourselves. So I'd like you to do, if you can, just post a very quick chat message. Let's learn about the chat. If you could just share your name, what organization you work for, tell us which country you're in if you like, and why innovation matters to you. Yeah, so just as we're warming up, as I go through and introduce things here, if you could just post in the chat who you are, where you come from, and why innovation matters for you. Just very briefly, just so we know who's all here. I'm hoping I'm seeing any people posting in the chat. I'm not seeing anything yet, so please post. Thank you very much. You will see on the top right of my screen some hashtags, innovation for SDGs. So if you want to post anything on Twitter or anything like that, you can use that hashtag, and SIP50. This is the 50th birthday year of the International Potato Center, and this event is part of that whole program. So those are the two hashtags you can follow. I hope people are posting their chat messages, telling us who you are and why innovation matters. We don't have to have your email address. Just tell us who you are, why innovation matters, why you are here today. So let me move on. I'm going to try to be quite brief here. Why are we here? What are we doing today? What will we be doing in the next 90 minutes? Well, we're trying to bring together a very powerful panel of individuals from around the world, and they're going to show you how intentional, but also inclusive innovation, and we're going to talk about what we mean by innovation, is really key to successful agricultural research, scaling processes, and rapid adoption. Yeah, so those are really fundamental to what we're trying to do, and we're going to focus today only on innovation as part of all of that. We're also very keen to make the case that, you know, innovation is different, and we need to invest in it. So as part of the transition from CGIAR to one CGIAR, as we're talking about the UN Food Systems Summit, the Climate Change Conference, everyone is talking about what should our food systems look like. So where does innovation fit in all of that? And in the words of one of our speakers later, we're wanting to inspire an innovation revolution in agriculture. So that's why we're here. We have 19 minutes, so we hope you're going to enjoy the next while with us. So what are we going to do? We're going to have a scene setting element with Marco Ferroni, Ale Antufan, and Hugo Campos, and I will have a conversation to set the scene. We are counting on you to interact. Then we have 5 cases, 5 stories, 5 conversations where you will hear about some lessons, some pitfalls, some insights from 5 colleagues from around the world. We'll introduce them a bit later. They are from all over the place and they have really fascinating lessons to share. Again, an interaction with yourselves, the audience. Then we have Jonas Chianwu from the African Development Bank giving us an investor perspective, a final conversation to pull together what we learned from all of this, and we'll have the closing remarks with Barbara Wells, who is the Director General of the International Potato Center. So that's what's going to happen in the next 90 minutes. We are really counting on you to be very active participants. So we've organized this as a set of conversations. I will be sharing some slides as we go through, but there will be no formal presentations as such. It's really a set of conversations. We want you to really be active in all of this. So don't, active listening, participation, and we want you to use the chat. So as we go, you will surely hear a lot of fascinating ideas and controversial points. We want you to post your comments, post your questions, post answers to each other, whatever you want to do. And our speakers will join you there and also react and discuss with you. So use the space well, use the conversation here in the next hour and a half to make connections and inspire not just revolutions, but collaborations. So that's what we're going to do. What I want to do now is start with our initial session here. We're about a minute behind schedule. I don't know how many people we are at the moment. We did have almost 500 people registered. They are coming from 60 countries and 160 organizations from around the world. So we're hoping that many of the people who registered have also joined. I can see 200 or so people are here at the moment. So, but let me start off now with our opening segment. We're going to set the scene, introduce some of the key elements in today's conversation. And I'm going to be joined for the next 15 minutes by Marco Ferroni, Halle-Anne Tufan, and Hugo Campos. So you should be seeing them on your screen. They should all have their videos on. And what we're going to have is a small conversation to set the scene. So I'm joined by these three, and I'm going to call them innovationists, because I'm not really sure what the best way to capture these three people in one word is. And the idea is that they give us the right focus. So I'm going to start with Marco Ferroni. He is chair of the CGIAR System Board. Marco, tell us a little bit about yourself, or what does innovation really mean? Why are we here? What are we here for? Tell us about innovation, what it really means. Marco.
Thank you very much, Peter. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
I like the concept of an innovation revolution in agriculture. So I'm Marco, I chair the CG System Board. I joined CGIAR 3.5 years ago to help oversee the design, negotiation, and now implementation of the One CGIAR reform. And before that, I spent 10 years as executive director of the Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture, which is an incubator of scalable solutions for smallholder farmers in emerging markets and low-income countries. On innovation, Peter, we usually recognize innovation when we see it, but that doesn't mean that we understand necessarily how it comes about, or, for example, how alternative innovation paths would have produced the same or similar or different results in relation to the particular problem one is looking at. So it is reasonable to ask, as we're doing here today, what is innovation? How does it come about? And how can an organization such as ours, CGIAR, become more impactful through innovation? When I ask around CGIAR, what do we mean by innovation? I typically get one of two answers depending on who I talk to. One, innovation is about efforts to develop new topics, fields of inquiry, and methods of research. Two, innovation is about efforts to move beyond research to impact on the ground in ways that improve lives measurably. Both answers are meaningful, and they're not independent of each other. Our focus here, and I think this is what we have in mind when we look at this particular discussion, is, however, on the second view, innovation for impact on the ground, which then itself becomes the innovation, which then, by the way, means that we're really using the term innovation in two ways here: innovation, the process, and innovation, the result. And I can contextualize this for CGIAR, but I'm sure you would like to call on the next speaker before I do that.
Thank you very much, Marco. So the process, the result, for scale. Let me talk to Halle-Anne. Halle, you're a research professor at Cornell University. Tell us a little bit about yourself I understand that you are kind of bridging lots of different roles, crop breeding, gender, and other things. You're also, as well as being a professor, associate director of the Food the Future Innovation Lab for crop improvement. So innovation must be the heart of your DNA. Introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Peter. And let me start by thanking Hugo for inviting me to the event and my co-host, organizers, speakers, and participants from turning this from an event idea into an event. So as an introduction, thank you, Peter. Yes, I'm a research professor at Cornell University, and I have leadership roles in the Gender Responsive Researchers Equipped for Agricultural Transformation, or GREAT project, Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Crop Improvement, and the Next Gen Cassava project. I have a dual appointment, both with the Department of Global Development, as well as plant breeding and genetics. And I think this dual appointment really embodies my work. I bridge disciplines, simultaneously identifying as a plant scientist, but also as a gender scholar. And that combination may seem strange and irreconcilable, but I think this disciplinary olive branch is really key to achieving our goals of eliminating hunger and building equitable food systems for all through innovation. And this is true for both definitions that Marco just gave for innovation, from developing new ideas, fields of inquiry and research, but more importantly, for the impact on the ground to improve lives. Because carefully considering whose lives we're improving and how lies at the foundation of equitable impact. And that's the perspective I hope we can all remember throughout this conversation today. Back to you, Peter.
You said you're a plant scientist and a gender scholar. That's an interesting use of terms. We'll come back on that one. Okay, let me hand over to my third scene setter here, Hugo Campos. Hugo is Director of Research at the International Potato Center, commonly referred to as SIP around the world. Hugo, tell us a little bit about yourself and especially how you see innovation, because you're the Director of Research. So tell us about innovation. And I realize that you're also the PI of a special project looking at sweet potatoes that's funded by the Gates Foundation called Sweet Games. So tell us, Hugo, about innovation, please. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, Peter, thanks for the opportunity, and hi, everyone. I really like the way that both Haley and Marco refer us bridge, because to some extent, that's my story so far. I was born in Chile, in a very small country in Latin America. I'm a plant breeder by training, but over the years, in addition to my formal training as a breeder, I also did an MBA, and I have tried just to develop a dual career, blending plant breeding and innovation, first in industry, but over the last 5 years at SIP. The first thing that I'd like to share with everyone is that innovation is different from R&D, and I think that's important to keep in mind. Now, in many cases, there are many successful innovation efforts that actually they have a significant, a large front-end R&D component, okay? However, the main drivers of success in innovation are beyond R&D. For instance, to succeed in innovation, we need what is called a business model. And a business model, it has nothing to do with profit. A business model, essentially, it helps you to understand how it is that you create value, you capture a part of that value, and more importantly, how you share that value with others. Even an NGO, an R&D organization, they might not be aware of it, but any successful NGO or R&D organization, in one way or the other, they have a business model. Whether they are for profit or no. So innovation building on R&D is framed around a business model. Actually, in our own case, at the moment, we are going through a transformation as a one CGIAR, and many initiatives are being designed. And I believe that this is a critical moment for us, where having the right business model on each of those initiatives is as relevant as coming up with the proper theory of change. In addition, innovation is about having a clever failure mindset. Let me elaborate a little bit. What do I mean by clever failure? This is not about being negligent. It's about encouraging and allowing failure, particularly among the young people. as long as we fail very early in the innovation cycle, very cheaply, and very often. So that's what I mean by clever failure, because we don't want to wait for 4, 5, 6 years before we realize that we're on the wrong track. Just to provide one example about that, I believe that at the moment, excellence in breeding is enabling breeders within CGI centers just to achieve that clever failure, because now we can fail in silico. We can fail with breeding prototypes very quickly, very cheaply, and very early in the process. Back to you, Peter.
Thanks, Hugo. That was a bit longer than I anticipated, but very thoughtful. And I'm interested in this notion that it's not, business models are not about profit, they're about value. That's probably a key point we'll have to come back to. Okay, Marco, back to you. You introduced a bit what we mean by innovation. Tell us what, and you mentioned, I think, these a term like combinations and bundles. What does all this mean for CGIAR? What does it mean for somebody who spends their life in the CGIAR?
Well, let me try to answer that. Of course, the place to start clearly is to note that CGIAR is an organization steeped in science and research. And the purpose of science and research is to create knowledge, not to change the world. But we are also a mission-driven organization, and as such, we are expected to catalyze impact, which can be defined, and I think Hugo defines it in this way, as significant beneficial change, which can be produced by first-order effects, such as, for example, improved agricultural technology that, if done right and adopted at scale, would then generate higher-order effects, such as better food security, living standards, better inclusion and gender equality, and other expressions of welfare. And it is clear that this requires more than research. It requires innovation, which by definition is always about combination, as you have just said, Peter, i.e. the calling together in innovation ecosystems of the different elements and contributions that are needed to create and deliver to users, products, processes, methods, solutions, and other improvements that upgrade their lives. This isn't an easily programmable task, but we can learn from the past, from what others are doing, and indeed from the examples that we will be discussing today. And of course, a lot can be said about this as we will be hearing and are already beginning to hear today. But I would like to make the following suggestion, which is to say that whenever we as CGIAR have had impact in the past, whether in the form of policy influence or, for example, better agronomy and seed, we did more than research. We were part of or assembled and drove premeditated and sometimes serendipitous combinations of contributions by different partners that together succeeded in improving lives. So combinations of contributions beyond research are the elixir of innovation, defined as progress on the ground. And I'd like to illustrate this with reference to improved seed and seed systems. And then if I may very briefly say something about CGIAR's research and innovation strategy to 2030 and the ambition of systems transformation espoused there and what it means for innovation, although I realize that I may not have time to get into the latter topic. Let me just focus on seed for a moment. Improved seed lies at the heart of progress on the farm and the wider agricultural economy, not to mention food security, for reasons that go beyond the improved genetics and therefore the yield and resilience potential embodied in improved seed. Yet delivery of improved seed to small farmers, seed with the right market preferred, including gender sensitive characteristics, is deficient in many parts of the world, particularly in Africa, and varietal turnover is needlessly slow. To change this situation, without which certain SDGs are unattainable, you need discovery research and plant breeding done in the right way for the right traits. But at the same time, you also need engagement with seed systems, which includes, and I quote from a recent paper that we commissioned on this, 4 things. First, policy and regulatory barriers hindering variety release. Second, understanding of target markets and their needs. Third, technical and business capacity development of local seed companies, including lines of credit, financing, and other support for them. And fourth, proper definition and execution of respective roles of CGIAR, national breeding programs, funders, seed companies, both commercial and social entrepreneurs, in what is a rapidly changing landscape. Now, we have great examples in CGIAR of successful seed delivery, at least one of which we will be hearing about today in the form of orange-fleshed sweet potato. But overall achievements in this sector are gravely deficient for the range of crops and geographies that are of interest. What does remedial action require? It requires the judicious and systematic assembly of the elements above for specific crops and markets. How to do this, and or also examining a process of this kind ex post, is absolutely a researchable proposition. But actually doing it has nothing to do with research. Instead, it is all about combination, management writ large, trial and error, stage gating, persuasion, networking, negotiation, execution. And then, once an addressable market for a type of improved seed is fulfilled, with most farmers, women and men, young and old, empowered to adopt and having adopted, at that point, you have achieved a systemic effect. You have achieved impact at scale in that addressable market, which means that you have transformed that particular system. Let me stop here, Peter, and turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Marco. That's given us some good insights. Let me go back to Halle. Halle, we've heard innovation. People often talk about innovation ecosystem, but they're not always equal systems. So what do we do with the unrepresented groups who are part of these systems? How could we, what should we be focusing on? Ah, you've just lost your power, it looks like.
Yes, I seem to have, sorry.
We can hear you
I'll
fine.
just continue. Yeah, sorry. Don't know what's going on. Cornell loses power, apparently. So I'd just like to take a step back and start by talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. So the systems transformation that CG's research and innovation strategy is aiming for really touches many SDG goals. Now, gender equality is a standalone goal within the SDGs, but I would argue that it's in fact critical to achieving all of the goals and the system transformation that will even achieving them possible. There are glaring issues of inequality across agriculture, food, climate, poverty, natural resources, water, soil, and nutrition spaces. And we ignore or trivialize them at our peril. For example, agriculture is a space of widespread marginalization. Women have less access globally to productive resources, land, finance, credit, extension services, education, technology, markets. Yet they're critical to food security and play a key role in every aspect of farming. But what does this have to do with agricultural innovation? The answer? Crash test dummies. Now bear with me. Here's a scary fact. US data from 1998 to 2008 show that female drivers are 73% more likely to sustain an injury in a car crash than male drivers. The culprit? The 50th percentile crash test dummy. This crash test dummy is the standard used in crash simulations globally and is modeled on the 50th percentile male body. We simply don't know enough about what happens in crash simulations with a range of genders and body types. So Hugo mentioned failing early. I think this is a painful illustration that failing late and continuing to fail through bias in innovation can have fatal consequences. It also shows us that innovation is a gendered construct. What that means is gender is integral and embedded in innovation and technology. And thinking about gender centrally in innovation is about asking about how the world we live in is shaped, but also about by and for whom. It's about power, it's about agency, representation, and voice. A body of literature documents how gender shapes agricultural innovation, from involvement in technology development processes to access to inputs that shape technology adoption, scaling, and innovation systems more broadly. There is a distinct lack of attention to gender relations, power, and agency in agricultural innovation systems. How are women, marginalized groups, and their interests and aspirations as farmers, consumers, entrepreneurs, scientists, represented in agricultural innovation systems? I think my mere presence in this discussion today to bring these perspectives is a sign that gender equality and inclusion is no longer a silo, but slowly being baked into every aspect of innovation. So we're on the right track. But I'm just going to close these introductory statements with 3 considerations. First, we must debunk the collective misassumption that innovation is gender neutral and think how we can systematically build a robust evidence base to support decisions around agricultural innovation. And this includes knowing the costs of failure for the most marginalized. Second, we must think critically how we're operationalizing gender equality as a value proposition. Hugo mentioned value being central to the business case. Does it make sense to talk about a business case for gender equality? Or does this run the risk of diminishing the importance of equality in the absence of demonstrated economic value? Third, I really think we must examine power dynamics in agricultural innovation to build meaningful participation for the most marginalized women. The uncomfortable truth is that gender equality goals can only be attained by challenging power structures. So I'll end it there, hand over to Peter, and I look forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Hallie. So you'll have a chance, I'm hoping, to dig deeper with some of these topics as we move forward. Okay, we're running a bit behind time. Hugo, so you're going to come back. You in the book that you edited, you talked a lot about changing mindsets in innovation. Tell us more about this. What do we mean by changing mindsets? Is that something that's possible? What's your thoughts on that one? Mindsets.
Yeah, yes, it is, Peter. Let me just provide 2 examples. In science, we're really hardwired to start from technology, okay? Whereas in innovation, it doesn't work in that way. Instead, you always need to start from the beneficiary, from the customer, from the job to be done, or from the pain of the customer, and then working our way back to technology. Now, why do we need to have such a focus on the customer or beneficiary needs? It's because in many cases, many innovations, they will fail despite funding availability, very talented people, strong technology, and sincere intentions. And why is it so? Because the main drivers for adoption, they don't always relate to technology. In many cases, they relate to either emotional or social aspects. Let me share just 2 examples with you. One, it's from our line of work. There have been very well-documented cases where, for instance, rice varieties, which yield more than previous one and which are more climate resilient, they are not taken by farmers. Why is that? It's because of loss aversion, confirmation bias, or sometimes peer pressure. So behavioral change, it is critical to actually securing high adoption. And let me just give you another example. A couple of years ago, a company created the Tata Nano car in India. And the price tag for this car, it was very cheap. It was about $3,500. And despite the company's very good invention, this was a failure in the market for a very simple reason. If you really think about that, nobody wants to use a car which is perceived as very cheap and advertised as cheap. So that's a mindset that we really need to change. We need to start the path from the customer or beneficiary, understanding the job to be done, and then going back all the way to technology rather than the other way around. And as already mentioned, another mindset is that that we need to embrace is let's not be afraid about failure. We need to fail, but in a clever way, as described already. Back to you, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugo. Thank you, Marco and Hallie. Also, we're failing and we're spending more time than we should in the opening, but I think we're doing it, I hope we're doing it in a clever way. I'm seeing colleagues posting on the chat. Please keep on posting in the chat. That would be great. We want to have the conversation also happening in the chat. So if you see question speakers that are interesting for you or addressed to you, please just reply to them in the chat. Okay, I'm going to move on. You guys have been listening for a few minutes. What I'm going to do, I want to have the first of our chat exercises. I want really to have to hear from all of you here with us. So in a second, I'm going to give you a question. I want you to take 30 seconds to think about your answer. and then type it in the chat. Do not send it until I tell you to send it, okay? So I'd like you to go to, the question is now in the chat. You can see it. You should see it now on the screen. So what value does this innovation thinking bring to your work? Please do not yet type it. What will happen, we will get a big wave of chat that will flow in our direction. So I'm going to give you a countdown in about 10, 15 seconds. I would like you to start to post your answers to the question, what value does this bring to your work? So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. If you can post now your chat messages, and we should be seeing a lot of messages pouring onto the screen. Yeah, and these should be coming to the whole audience. So choose the whole, all panelists and attendees should be, all attendees should be here. So as all the chat is pouring in, I'm going to hand over to Halle and Marco, and they are going to take us through the next segment. But as we see these things coming, Marco, Halle, are you seeing anything in the chat that is striking you as something that really resonates or it's surprising? It's very difficult to read 200 chats in 1 minute, but anything you're noticing as I hand over to you? Halle.
I'm seeing the word impact quite a bit, which is great to see. Marco?
Mm-hmm.
I am seeing, in particular, the question by Murad Sartas and versions of what he or she is asking, namely, what does one CGIAR do in order to mainstream innovation, i.e., in order to create an innovation culture in our organization that becomes subcutaneous, that becomes a part of our DNA? Is a good question, and I'm sure we will get to it. I have, of course, thoughts to add to it, but won't do it right now. Halle, maybe we need to get into the conversation with with our panel.
Sure.
Right, over to you.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, everyone, and keep it coming. We'll try to read them and respond to them as they come through. So we'll move right along. As Peter said, we're a little behind. And we have 6 great speakers today. The first section will have 5 speakers that Marco and I will ask questions to sequentially. Every speaker has about 5 minutes to respond to 2 questions. So we'll start that process now. I'll open up first with introducing Bram Govaerts. He's the Deputy Director General for Research at CIMMYT. Hello, Bram, and thank you for joining us today. As our first discussant, you'll be talking about mass agro today. So can you tell us a little bit about what the business model or approach of mass agro uses to ensure innovation is relevant and innovation is available to all? In particular, what positive impact could implementation of the agricultural knowledge management for innovation framework that you mentioned have on gender norms and power relations? Thank you.
Thanks, Sam, for that excellent question. And first of all, a pleasure as always being with you, and wanted to take the opportunity to do a shout out. You're an example for many on bringing gender in the center of innovation. And also Marco, thanks for being our guru on innovation with keeping the farmer centrally. So thanks for that. And of course, Ugo, keep us sharp in this confusion about what innovation is and what it is not. And I think also that is what brings Masagro at the center of the discussion. Masagro is a collaboration network, and therefore I'm talking here in name of over 150 partners from the public, private, and social sector that came together. And guess what? We didn't discuss once structure between us. We did discuss how to put in place a structure, a way of working that actually is innovation for innovation. So we developed a knowledge system that can fuel, that can catalyze innovation, respecting, and this is important, traditional knowledge, injecting it with the new innovative knowledge. And I think we need to be clear that when we do innovation, culture and values are embedded in those. And so we need to be very conscious about that, and that then shows us that we need to have the needed respect. And actually, this knowledge system for innovation, knowledge management system for innovation that we have put together with those partners is based on simple things. Learning by doing. So we accept failure as long as you learn from it. In order to start your innovation, we have to listen and don't be afraid to leap forward, to do better what we're already good at and take a risk. Innovation is also about taking that risk. and of course to lead by example. And it's a systems approach in which we embed the principles of systems intervention. And in that whole system, and I think you can see a scheme here, we start from basic research on platforms, and then we go to farmers' fields with modules in a semi-controlled environment, and then we go massive, where actually farmers apply, incorporate, innovate, and in that sense actually mix the scientific knowledge with their own traditional knowledge, and that generates that innovation towards the future.
So, Bram, thank you very much. How are the many actors that you're talking about and that are characterized in your slide actually being brought together? What's the collective action dimension here that brings them together so that they work towards the same common goal?
Absolutely, and this is an excellent question. I think that the whole system only works if, first of all, we have a discussion about what a better future looks like. So one of the elements is the systems approach, where we do some kind of strategic planning based on a massive scenario planning exercise that we did with all actors involved. And it actually starts from asking the simple question, where are we today? And you would be surprised that you get very different answers if you ask, where are we actually today? Are we doing good? Are we not doing good? Are we happy? Are we not happy? You get already quite some different answers. And from that, we say, how does a better future look like? And it is not about casting the future or predicting the future. It's very difficult to predict, especially the future. It's about casting a potential ideal future that we then can bring all together. And from that, we work back. But also we let the accountability and we turn where it sits, and we turn from a push. I think we scientists sometimes are pushers. We push technology, we push ideas, we push data, but it's actually going to a pull, where that ideal future pulls us towards doing things that can move us towards the same. On the other hand, it's also about transparency, putting the light on some things by generating data, turn those data into information, the information in decision making, and the decision making and decision taking. And then I go back to Anne, of course, because in order to do the decision taking, in order to apply those decisions, that's why gender, social inequality, etc., again, comes into place. So it's not enough to have the information available. We really need to work through that full value chain, full agri-food systems approach to move collectively towards the future. And I just wrap up, Marco, with a final thought. I think this is a fantastic seminar at this point. I think there's no other point in time where we have been given the gift of responsibility. I mean, there's no other point in time after this crisis that it's more clear that we will be judged by the generations to come. And I think our actions today and our decisions today will create and define the opportunities for those tomorrow. So we will be held accountable, and we need the innovation in order to reach that ideal future.
Thank you very much, Brahms. Very rich. So, of course, it requires a vision, it requires leadership, it requires a lot of communication across the partnership that is meant to work together in order to generate and disseminate the innovation, whatever in a specific the topic it may be addressing. Bram, we will have more seminars of this kind because the objective is to mainstream innovation and thinking about innovation, understanding innovation, practicing innovation into our organization. Unfortunately, we don't have too much time, which means, Bram, you're dismissed if you may, and I'll turn to the next speaker in the form of Graham.
Thanks a lot.
Right. Thank you very much for your contribution, Bram. Graham, welcome to this discussion. You are the producer of golden eggs, along with your colleagues, as you have said to the SIT board not long ago, in your capacity as director of RTB, the CGIAR program on roots, tubers, and bananas. Tell us a little bit about RTB from an innovation perspective, and specifically, how did you and your team think about research and innovation, the interaction between the two? Because obviously you want to drive impact. How do research and innovation interact in your scheme, and how has that interaction evolved over time? Over to you, Graham.
Yeah, so we wanted to put the scaling of innovations right at the center of the RTB program. And we did that in several ways. And a key insight behind our work is that the technical innovations don't scale separately. It isn't sufficient to have the amazing variety. That's got to be embedded and accompanied by a series of other innovations. So within RTB, actually, we had developed a novel approach to do scaling, which evolved over the past 4 years, which is called scaling readiness. You can see the guidelines which we've published. And the key insight at the heart of that is that you need to look at the innovation package, and you actually need to consider what's the weakest element. And we call that the bottleneck. So you need to unpack all the different elements of that scaling, of that innovation package, and you need to consider what are the complementary parts of the innovation, and you need to drill down and think, well, what might be the most limiting factor in the uptake of this innovation package? So I'll stop there with that explanation. Oh, the other thing we did, which I should say, we set up a fund called the Scaling Fund. And the idea of the Scaling Fund is to, if you like, incubate innovation packages. We had a competitive call within the program, and we identified 8 different promising innovation packages. And these received funding for a 2-year period for incubation to take those innovation packages to a higher level of scaling. And we accompanied the implementation of the projects in that scaling fund by backstopping from our scaling team, who used the scaling readiness approach. And that scaling readiness approach progressively evolved and improved as a result of the implementation of the scaling project. So if you like, we combined the practice of scaling through these projects with the science of scaling by learning about and improving the way in which we do that scaling.
Thank you very much, Graham. And of course, scaling requires a whole other seminar also in its own right. Holly, over to you.
Thank you, Marco, and hello, Graham. Can you perhaps give us an example of an innovation package that you've taken to scale? Were there failures or course corrections that take into account views and impact women, for example?
Yes, I can. So the innovation I'd like to pick up on is around the orange fresh sweet potato. This has been one of the most successful scaling innovations, I think, in the CGIAR in recent years. It's reached already over 6.5 million households in Africa. Now, as I said, in this case as well, taking innovation to scale required developing a package of interrelated innovations. Now, at the heart of that innovation was a sweet potato variety with a high level of vitamin A, which is bright orange. And that variety can really improve nutritional status of women, babies, and their young kids. But in Africa, actually, ordinarily, African consumers prefer a white or yellow flesh variety. They don't know about those health benefits. So you need a complementary innovation around community level healthcare, so that they can, or behavioral change, so that they can understand the benefits that bring. And you need to think in a very deliberate way, working with the health community to get that behavioral change. So it can't be done by researchers with the most amazing variety. It's not going to happen. You need these complementary innovations. You also need to work at a more general level in nutrition awareness. And we worked on that using campaigns, radio, market-based promotions. And beyond that, recently, we realized another, if you like, the bottleneck innovation was actually around the ability of farmers to access vines. These are the seed of the sweet potato, which is perishable, at the start of the growing season. So to do that, we worked on another innovation as part of, if you like, the bottleneck innovation, which is called the Triple S. That involves using sand to store sweet potato roots to grow sprouts or vines at the beginning of the growing season. So that was a way in which we resolved that bottleneck in the seed system. But we also, it's important to realize that going to scale means looking at context. And it means thinking about responsible scaling and who's being impacted. So gender should be considered in several ways. It should be considered in the way you design your interventions to get scaling, because men and women receive information in different channels or sources, and men often have more access to extension of the service. So we need to purposely think about how do we reach women through this. But beyond that, there could be unanticipated consequences of the way we do this work. If we improve sweet potato, we get a higher price for that orange one, then men may be more inclined to sell that. And then instead of consuming the biofortified food, it goes into markets, and that has nutritional impacts for the households. So we need to be very cognizant as we work to consider gender, both in terms of the way we design our interventions, but also think through the outcomes and the impacts of the changes we're making. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. You Perfectly on time and great example. Thank you for sharing that with us and re-emphasizing the importance of gender from the start to the end, both from design to delivery. And that's really important that we want to reflect on that today. This is a nice segue to talk to Lauren Landis. Hello, Lauren. Thank you for joining us today. And you're the country director for the World Food Program in Kenya. And we're really excited to have you here with us today as someone truly with your boots on the ground. Can you tell us a little bit about the orange flesh sweet potato, why it's important to the World Food Program, and how does the innovation change lives of its recipients, especially women? Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me, and very a great welcome to everyone, and so happy to be a part of this program today. I'm a huge fan of the orange flesh sweet potato and watching what it does in a place like Kenya. In Kenya, we basically have a huge portion of the population, maybe 75% smallholder farmers, 50% of those are women. And you also have a population where 26% of the population is stunted. There's about 70% with a high or a low, they are very much iron deficiency. So they are low in iron and also in vitamin A, particularly in children. And what we've seen by working with about 1,500 smallholder households, particularly in what we call the ASALs, the arid and semi-arid parts of Kenya. So very low on rainfall and a very vulnerable population. And here we focus on food security and nutrition among the most vulnerable, and particularly with women. So we have been the adopter. We are the results part of the innovation example, and we have helped to get the vines and increased production in 6 counties within Kenya. And these are the most, not the high productivity areas of Kenya, but the most vulnerable areas. And we have seen amazing results. Because there is a high adaptation of this potato for all the right reasons, which I can go into in a bit.
Lauren, this is a fantastic story, and all of us want to thank you also for your commitment and passion for this cause. Let's talk a little bit more about scaling. I think you just implied comments on that. What are the 1 or 2 big picture factors that need to be released, that need to be overcome for massive scaling? Let's say a tripling of the number of beneficiaries over a number of years. I'm not going to speculate how many would that would be. What do you need in order to scale?
Yeah, I mean, we've already found that it's perfect for an area that has limited water or recurrent drought. What we're seeing is that we can produce 3 crops a year of these. So women who produce these get income throughout the year. So it's the combination of the nutrition and the improved livelihood. The improved income is really what is going to get this to go to scale. There's some nice side benefits as we're being discussed in that children love the sweetness of the orange flesh sweet potatoes. So the improvement of nutrition and the promotion by health centers is also going to increase the adaptation and adoption by many people. But really, what's going to take us the furthest, and what we don't have yet, is really improved processing so that smallholder farmers can really take it to the commercialization level. So they can produce 3 crops a year. You can see from the picture on the screen, they're large, they're useful. They are consumed in households, again, because they're promoted and because children like them. And not just used in markets, but they are also marketed highly. The problem is you can't, if you don't have adequate storage and processing facilities, if you can't make flour and other products out of it, you're suddenly going to find that you're not able to keep them and to get as high a price as smallholder farmers would like for them. So it's the transformation of the sweet potatoes that's going to get us to the next level.
Exactly. So the opportunity is there, the income incentive is there, the nutritional incentive can be promoted through the measures, for example, that you have mentioned, demand creation, if you wish, but it is really about growing the market and the infrastructure for the market, which is about value chain development. You mentioned storage facilities, processing facilities, and that doesn't come about out of thin air. It needs to be provided for. And I think we're therefore, I hope that I'm interpreting you correctly. We're talking about growing the market, which requires investments along the value chain.
Yeah, we need private sector investment.
Yeah.
Already in the supermarket in Kenya, you can find orange flesh sweet potato flour, but it needs recipes. It needs further promotion in many ways.
Understood. Thank you very much, Lauren. This is another great story. We turn to our next speaker, Dr. Vivian Anthony, Director of Demand-Led Breeding, the Demand-Led Breeding Program at the Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture. And good afternoon, Viv. It is great to see you again, even if only virtually. Your topic is technology and client demand. And in the realm of plant breeding, the opportunity of market-preferred plant variety design and what this entails for research and innovation alike. So could you tell us a little bit about this? Could you also in particular tell us something about product profiling? What is product profiling and why is it of interest as we are looking to developing products that really respond to what users need, what users want? You're muted. You're muted. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marco. I'm really pleased to be part of this conversation. But maybe if I take it in two parts, because the one goes to the other. So one aspect I wanted to talk about is what I'm going to talk about is about demand-led breeding. And the idea came from a piece of data which showed that on average, when we started, only 35% of varieties in Africa were being adopted. And at the time, everybody said that was because basically there weren't seed systems. But myself and entrepreneurial breeders in Africa challenged the thinking of the day and said, well, actually, what are the main reasons why products aren't, why don't people take up new products, especially when they've got good new technology in them? And if you analyze this, there are many, many reasons. But if you look virtually in every part of the world, consumer-based purchasing, it's basically because you produce something that people don't want or the market isn't there for it. I mean, that sounds terribly obvious, but actually, that's not what we do on a daily basis. So if you then say, okay, well, what do people want? You say, well, how do you work it out? And if I come on to product profiling, so everybody says, well, you do market research. Well, of course you do. But a product profile, and I'm holding one sort of up here, is really you define exactly who are you creating your innovation for. And then you describe technically exactly what is the specification that you're trying to achieve. You don't have a go and see where you end up. You start from really deciding what you're going to design. And if you look at many, many things around the world, many products, you start from design. And we looked, well, where are people learning how to design? And we couldn't find anything outside of the private sector. Virtually, there was one slide from Saskatchewan University we found. And so the whole of the demand-led is about how do you understand demand? How do you work out what people want? And then how do you describe it? In a product profile.
You found that the private sector has better methods and certainly is more attuned even to the question in the first place of demand. How do you analyze demand and what consumers want than potentially the public sector? And so we since CGIAR is in the public sector, we can learn from working together. I think is one of the messages you're giving. And Holly, over to you. Also, I don't mean to monopolize the conversation.
No, that's great. Hi, Vivienne. Really great to
Hey.
see you. I'm just appreciative that you're here as someone who really pioneered the thinking around demand-led breeding. So some of the first documentation I saw, so just appreciating you
Thank
pushing
you.
that point and the importance that it's come to today, really. So you mentioned market research and how important it is to understanding client preferences, but how about emerging or future markets? Often talking to breeders, they say, well, it's not enough, it's 10 years from now. How do you include foresight analysis and how can you use it to support R&D, especially for equality and inclusion and how we can project those into the future? Thank you.
Is that better? Something's
yeah.
okay. I'm going
Yes,
to
you're back.
hold it now.
Sorry about that.
I'm really glad you asked that question because the leap usually happens is, okay, well, I sort of know what a product profile is. And now I do market research. So I go out and ask everybody what they want, and then I'm going to get it right. Well, the next step in the thinking is no, you're going to get it wrong, especially if you're talking about breeding that takes any length of time. Because if you do market research, and if we're asked anything, we'll give an answer that's on our mind now, maybe to, if you're lucky, 3 years out. But you're certainly not going to be thinking about something that might affect you 5 years out. And that's typically the time frame we should be onwards thinking. So then you sort of say, well, okay, well, what's the answer? And I think Bram talked about it earlier. Foresight is about thinking about what are the drivers and what's that can change the future. The only thing that's guaranteed in life is it's going to be different to now. So some things are highly predictable. You know, population growth is pretty predictable, actually. But there are other things that are not predictable. You know, certain technologies that perhaps not being talked about. So it's a combination. And a little story, when I was a rookie and I started doing fungicide invention work, when I first started working, thought, well, we had a meeting about targeting for research. You know, what are we all going to work on? We'll ask the business, won't we? We'll bring in the commercial people, bring in the marketeers, they'll tell us the answer. And so we said, well, what should we be doing? And they turned around and said, well, you tell us what you can produce with clever technology and we'll tell you whether it's worth anything and whether there's a market for it. So the message I'm trying to get across is we as researchers, together with reaching out to multifunctional different people who have different opinions, is the way to try and look at what changes could occur and whether we are producing things that will remain valid, not expecting anybody else to do it. We've all got to do it.
Thank you so much, Vivienne. Back to us as responsibility to thinking of these as researchers and really engaging. It's so important. And that's happening massively, I think, across the 1CG as well, these cross-functional, multifunctional teams. Now, the question is how to get them to work effectively. Maybe that's phase 2 and how we structure our interdisciplinary teams. So thank you so much for those reflections. I'm going to move on now to Marianne Sadok, the public affairs lead at East West Seeds. Hi, Marianne. Thank you for joining us. East West Seed founder Simon Groot was awarded the World Food Prize for his work, which has reached hundreds of millions of consumers and farmers with improved vegetable varieties. What is a significant positive change that East West Seed looks for and for whom? How do you ensure intentional positive impact for women and youth in the countries that you work in?
Thank you, Hallie. Let me first say something about East West Seed, and thank you for this opportunity. So East West Seed introduced the market-oriented plant breeding in Southeast Asia in 1982. We worked mainly on local vegetables that were popular among farmers and consumers. When our founder, Simon Groot, first came to the Philippines, there was only seed trading, mostly imported varieties of temperate vegetables from North America, from Europe, and from Japan. And plant breeding was done mainly by public research institutes. So we started local breeding. And when we introduced the first hybrids of bitter gourd, eggplant, and squash, farmers readily accepted them because of higher yields. However, improvement in productivity took longer, and we realized that providing quality seeds is not enough to increase the productivity and income of farmers. They have to adopt better agronomic practices to optimize the genetic potential of improved varieties. So we established the Technology Transfer Unit, now called the Knowledge Transfer Department, which conduct intensely focused extension activities like season-long farmer field schools, demonstration farms, and harvest festivals. So a team of knowledge transfer specialists work closely with the farming community and with partner organizations. So the significant positive change is by positioning vegetable production as an attractive business opportunity, the company improves the livelihoods of smallholder farmers in less developed areas of Africa and Asia, and also creating opportunities for crop diversification, because most of these countries are only concentrated on rice, corn, or wheat production. So crop diversification and income development catalyzes the growth of competitive agri-input markets and increases the availability of safe to eat and affordable vegetables in markets supplying lower income consumers.
Thank you very much, Hale. Shall I take over?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes,
okay.
please.
Well, very briefly, of course, our problem, Marianne, is time. And look, I can't help saying this. I will never forget our friend Simon Groot's acceptance speech at the World Food Prize in 2019. We were both there. He opened his speech with the words, "The farmer's worst enemy is lousy seed." How about that? So, of course, you need good products, and that is where you have pioneered innovations that are on the record. But you also need you need to support farmers, right? Market access, information services, extension, risk mitigation methods, and so on. And that oftentimes requires, in the smallholder settings in poorer countries that we are talking about, requires public-private cooperation. Could you very briefly say something about the latter?
Yeah. Thank you, Marco. Indeed, most of our knowledge transfer projects are done in partnerships with like-minded organizations as they bring additional financial resources, which enables us to scale our outreach. Also, synergies also with these like-minded organizations bring additional skills and experience in financial literacy, microfinance, advocacy on health and nutrition, post-harvest handling, and even linkages to downstream buyers and marketing platforms. So partnerships are very important. It is like also in breeding, combining ability and finding the right partners spell, the difference between success or failure of these knowledge transfer projects.
Yeah, they are. And again, PPPs are the subject of another whole conference, aren't they? Thank you so much, Marianne. I think we move on to the next speaker. Do I have this right? Yes, I have it right. So the next speaker is Jonas Chianwu from the African Development Bank. Welcome, Jonas, to our discussion. You are the chief economist.
You're a little bit too fast.
Oh, too fast.
You're a little bit too fast. Just 1 second. If you can hold that statement, I come back to you. Come back. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, speakers. We've had a great first round. I want to encourage everybody to keep on chatting, and also, please, panelists, if you can reply to some of the questions that have been posted. We wanted to give the audience a chance to reply, to give their thoughts. So what we want to do, please, is very quickly, just like before, I'm going to post you the chat question. What is your most important takeaway, insight from these 5 cases so far? If you can start to type, take 10 seconds, what's the most important takeaway, insight that you have heard now in the last 20 minutes, 30 minutes? I'm going to give you a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you can post your response now. What is your most important takeaway? And we're already seeing the first one, consumers and users at the center. So if you can keep posting your messages, and then we're going to move on. This also gives Marco and Hale a 1-minute break before we move on to the next. So let's please post your question, post your responses to the chat message. We're hearing about scaling, customers, users. What are we seeing? Users, value addition, keep on posting, markets, obsessed with seats. My goodness, that's interesting. Multidisciplinarity. Okay, Hale, Marco, what are you seeing in the chat that's striking in this new chat, the wave of chat which is pouring in?
So I am basically seeing what you have just summarized, Peter.
I thought you might say something more creative than me.
It's difficult to read the chat.
It is very difficult. I really like
Yeah.
the team-focused comments, because I think that's something we don't pay enough attention to. It's kind of the way we do things will change so dramatically by considering all these different dimensions, yet how we structure those teams and how they work together. So I love that people are pulling that out and saying we need interdisciplinary, multifunctional teams in market insight. So that's jumping out at me.
Okay, I'm going to hand back to you guys. I'm sorry to break in before Marco, so I'm bringing it back to you. And indeed, we're going out to Jonas.
Okay, thank you so much, Peter, and apologies for having jumped the gun before. I looked to my co-moderator, Hallie, and she nodded. So
I also had it wrong.
Jonas, are you there? You're the Chief Agricultural Economist of the African, there you are, Jonas Chianwu. Welcome to this discussion. Chief Ag Economist of the African Development Bank, which means that you represent an organization that is an investor, which means that you're looking, and your organization is looking for solid returns on your investments in agriculture. And this in turn requires scaling. It's not possible without scaling along a range of criteria, from economic to social and all the way to environmental. What sort of thinking, what sort of innovation business model does the African Development Bank look for from its partners, and why? And also, could you address perhaps the question of how do you work with partners, borrowing member countries, grantees, to maximize the development payoff of your investments?
Okay, thank you very much, Marco, and thank you, Hugo, and the rest for inviting us to this meeting. First of all, I assume that I have had enough introduction, but let me just add a little within the time allowed. At the African Development Bank, I coordinated an earlier program called SAD-ASC. SAD-ASC is support to agricultural research for development of strategic crops in Africa, which was a predecessor program that supported research, dissemination, and capacity development, working with the CG centers. At the African Development Bank, I coordinate that, which is being implemented in 30 countries and working with 11 CG centers. And at the same time, I coordinate another program that is called the Agriculture Fast Track, which is giving some grants for SMEs to be able to generate technical content to prepare bankable programs. But at the African Development Bank, the innovation that we have that has really helped us quite a lot is even our thinking in terms of the principles that guided the formulation of TAT. Basically, we have 4 fundamental principles. One is that technology matters. Right technology that is available and easily accessible to the target group is very important. The second one is that scale matters. Wide scale deployment and adoption is the only way to change the food and nutrition situation in Africa. We are tired of sports of successes in pilots. So we need to go to scale because those pilots have not changed so much. Then another important principle is that partnership and collaboration matter because of the magnitude of the assignment before us. For instance, under that, we are trying to reach 40 million farmers with technologies. So you can imagine the need for collaboration and partnership. Another important principle is that policy and regulation, they matter for the right enabling environment and to ensure private sector involvement in seeds, processing, and marketing. Without the private sector, it is difficult for us to reach the sustainability and also the scale we are thinking about. Now, with these principles in mind, we have to go through what we call a multi-stakeholder approach, or what you can call an innovation platform that brings all the people who are in the regional technology in delivery infrastructure. Everybody that is supposed to do something that is different or contribute to what we are trying to do in the whole continuum of the agricultural value chain. And that is the approach we have used to bring about this seed systems innovation that addresses systems approach and value chain approach, which is so important for sustainability of the innovations. And then if I just want to give one example as to what we have done with the seed systems innovation, using those innovation platforms and or stakeholder approach in Sudan. and also in Ethiopia. In Sudan, for instance, the demand for what the national consumption for wheat is about 2.9 million tons per annum. Now, before that, what they could only produce was just 14% of that particular requirement. I'm talking about 4 years ago. But when that came with the improved heat-tolerant varieties of wheat that yields on the average 3.3 tons per hectare compared to the old variety that yielded only 1.5 tons per hectare, they were now able to increase the production domestically from that 400,000 tons to 1.13 million per annum. So now they are able to meet about 9% of their needs. So that gives you an idea of when you have the technology, the seed systems, for instance, and then you have the approach, which is the innovation platform, and then you bring everybody that will contribute to make sure that all the pain points along the value chain are removed, then you can do quite a lot. So that is what I can say at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonas. And I could not agree more with your comment about too many pilots. I call it the disease of projectitis in agriculture. Too many small projects that repeat past experiments. And in fact, pilots can create the smoke screen of illusions. Why? Because they create stories, a narrative, and people swap those stories, and they can easily fall prey to the illusion that they have solved a problem, and they haven't solved the problem. They have just mostly repeated an experiment that others may have already have done. So systemic change is not happening on the basis of projects, and certainly not on the basis of small projects. It requires more than that. But I think Halle has a question for you.
Yeah, thank you, Marco. And thank you, Jonas. That last point, just picking up on something in the chat, someone mentioned a collection of failures from the CG. And I think, Marco, that speaks to what you're talking about is, can we be more transparent with failure and be able to communicate that so we're not repeating the same mistakes in these cycles? So that's an interesting point coming back. Jonas, thank you for sharing this. And I think I love the idea of the multi-stakeholder innovation platforms. How in these engagements does ADB safeguard the needs of marginalized or left behind innovation market actors and other targets?
You know, the bank is quite passionate about taking everybody along. And you can see that one of the ways we do that is even in our project formulation, to make sure that inclusivity is addressed. And even the review process at the bank makes sure that there are organizational units that when they are reviewing the project concept note, they are looking at issues of gender. There are other organizational units that are looking at involvement of the youth and how much of the vulnerable group have you been able to take into account. That is about inclusivity. But when it comes to even environmental consideration, we have organizational units that look at whether the project you are trying to embark on is going to displace somebody. And if it is, have you made enough provision for resettlement? All of those things are very, very important to the bank, because we even have some people who are really going to the field to check, especially for some of those big programs that involve like establishment of dams and things like that, to check if there are people whose livelihood will be mortgaged as a result of the project. So that is how the bank addresses the issue of those people that can be left behind in the process of bringing about development. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonas. And I think what you're highlighting is accountability. So as you're rolling out this programming, that you're not forgetting to check, and the field checks is really important. The course corrections, being open to feedback and adjustments as you're learning and rolling out programming. I think that's excellent and really important to model. Unfortunately, we will have to move on. We are perpetually out of time. So thank you so much, Jonas, for joining us this afternoon for you and this morning for us. And we are going to hand back over to Peter for a short Q&A. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Halle and Marco and all of the colleagues. Super session, really interesting. We're not at the end yet, but we're going to try to pull together some of our insights. So same exercise. We're going to give you first a small chat, and then we're going to have a poll. So stay with us. First question, we just heard from Jonas and the African Development Bank, and we know there are various people on the call here who work for investors. So what must research investors do to inspire innovation revolutions? Yeah, what do we think? Whether you're a researcher, whether you're an extensionist, you're an NGO, what do you think the investors must do to inspire innovation revolutions? Take 10 seconds, 20 seconds, start to type. And I'm hoping that James has posted my chat message for me. Yes, I can see. So please, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I can see post now. Kieran is already posting, so here we go. So if you're working for an investor organization, these messages are for you, but I assume they're also for the people, everybody who's here too, not just for the investors. So let's see what's here. Marco, you used to be an investor. Are you seeing anything, since you're no longer an investor, you can speak freely. Are we seeing things here that would be challenging for you in an investor role? The whole conversation about failures has come up. Marco, are you still with us?
Oh, yeah, I'm here. So, Peter, thank you. So from an investor perspective, you want a clear business case. You want to know what you're putting your money towards. You want to be having clarity with respect to the objectives. We sometimes don't necessarily see enough of this in the public sector. We also sometimes don't see enough of it in the private sector, by the way. But that is what you want to be having clarity on. And of course, in the context, in the agricultural context that we are talking about, you want to know what the theory of change is. What is the path from the investment, from the input, from the various activities according to your work plan towards output and outcomes. That is what you want to be clear about, and we call this the theory of change.
Thank you, Marco. Put you
Peter,
on the spot there.
I'll just pull one thing out. I think
Yes,
I didn't catch who put it, but don't over technologize, which I thought was really interesting. So, keeping things simple, which was kind of a beautiful idea. Rewarding impact, the incentive structures being geared towards impact. Someone was writing in the chat box, and also a lot of systems level change. This is speaking to Marco's points in opening too, is coming out in the chat.
Super, thanks very much. So I can see some more chats are still coming in. We're going to move on. So we're going to do a poll now. And I'm hoping that our colleagues from the IT at the SIP have set up the poll for us. So we've been talking about quite a lot of different things here. And you have one option. We would like you to think about what is most needed to successfully achieve an innovation revolution in agricultural research. So the options: fail early and often, value diversity, put those innovation users first, combine with partners, make space and seed power, give away power, have different mindsets, or something else. So what do you think is the most important, what's most important to successfully achieve the revolution? You should be voting now, and I think the voting is open. I don't know how many people have voted. I can't see. So please vote and then submit what you think it should be. And I'm waiting for somebody from the organizers to tell me we're about 225 people. So when we have 100 votes, maybe we can show the results. If you're still voting, please, if you think there's something else that's not on the list, please post it in the chat. Hugo is reminding me to say that there's still 230 people here, which is a big success. So, but please, I would like to see 230 votes. So let's see, how many votes have we got? I don't have access to the voting system, so how far have we got? Now I can see how many we got. Is that the result, yeah?
Yeah, the result says put innovations first, 40% is the highest.
Yeah. That's the result, right? So how many votes do we have? Do we know how many votes we got?
Innovation users first, Peter.
Yes. How many people voted? Okay, 5 people voted. It could be right.
No,
Good.
Peter,
Okay, thank you very much.
Peter, we had around
Yes.
168 people, so slightly over half.
Super.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's excellent. So Hallie, you saw any comments? let me move to the next slide. We're okay. So we're going to try to wrap up. Having just seen the results of the poll having had the conversation, Hugo, Halle, Marco, you have about a minute only each to share some reflections from the past 90 minutes. Maybe start with the poll. Hugo, maybe you can start us off. What do you think? What's your takeaway message you want to share with us? A synthesis point from the meeting.
Actually, quite a few, Peter. First of all, I'm delighted at the community and participation of people. I believe that the three main take-home messages is about let's keep the customer or the beneficiary center at the center of everything we do, and let's work from that back to technology, not the other way around. Also, thinking from a business model perspective, and as Anil put it so nicely, from a fast learning, it is critical. And finally, I just want to bring a sense of urgency. If we want to achieve the SDG goals in 2030, we have less than 9 crops of harvest in most countries in the world. Out of one of generation going back in history as the one unable to achieve that. So these are my main take-home message. Thank you.
Halle, any thoughts from yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. The chats were really triggering. I love that the top two were valuing diversity and starting with end users. And I just like everyone to think again about what we mean by the end user. Who are they? And those two are interrelated, valuing the diversity of the end users and valuing them and their diversity. So those two really go together in my head. And I think it's really important to think of that. And also to remember to ask those end users, what is the world they want to see? What is the change they want to see? Not assuming that, and really tapping in and bringing all those end users into the conversation is really important. And just leaving with a thought of often, you know, when we talk about gender equality or power structures, people become very uncomfortable. And I think that's okay. It's okay to be uncomfortable because change and challenging systems is uncomfortable, but it's a sign we're on the right track. So I just want to reiterate that if we're largely favoring men, especially as farmers, consumers, entrepreneurs, researchers, and end users, if we're not hearing a diverse voice, then that's just not going to get us where we want to go. And I just really like to make a call to be open to uncomfortable discussions and really examining discussions around power relations and power structures within agricultural research and innovation will really be very important to move us forward in an impactful way. So closing to say, I hope everyone leaving today is thinking about what they can do in their work towards making those changes. So not just being a spectator, but being a participant. What can you do today in your work to positively impact or shift your mindset change more towards impact and end user orientation? So I'll close with that and hand over to Marco.
Thank you so much, Halle. I think that this seminar is symptomatic of important changes happening in CGIAR, among others, the thinking having to do with the thinking about innovation. I think we are evolving towards a renewed understanding of the role of innovation in the pursuit of our goals. And one symptom of that also is, for example, the name of our current new research strategy, the 2030 Research and Innovation Strategy. It used to initially be called the Research Strategy, and then it became the Research and Innovation Strategy. And I think that is quite speaking to the changes that I'm talking about that have something to do with our organization and how we understand that we need to get organized for impact going forward, given the monumental changes that are facing people and the planet in the 21st century. And in this context, I can reveal that there is a discussion, a live discussion in the system board on this particular topic under the heading of what is transformational market-oriented innovation. We're talking about a number of different offers that CGIAR would stand for. First, research to generate knowledge or answer questions critical to creating impact. That is our more traditional science-based, research-based function. Second, sustaining innovation where current markets exist for the product or service that we are innovating to improve. And thirdly, transformational innovation, which is innovation for settings where there is no current market, but a clear need has been identified. And while we did not make these distinctions in our earlier introduction to this event, I think that in this particular event, we have mostly been implicitly been talking about the notion of transformational innovation. And what is now needed is that the meaning of this, the implications of this, organizationally speaking, in terms of our own institutional development and so on, is currently being explored. And this event has been extremely helpful to sharpen ideas in this to this effect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco. And just to remind people that we've been capturing all of the questions in the chat. We've hoped that many people have been answering questions in the chat. If there are unanswered questions, we will be finding a way to come back to you offline afterwards. We're just about to end this session. I just want to re-advertise. Hugo was promoting his book earlier, and this is the book. Just in case you want to find it, there's a link there, and it's fantastically open access, courtesy of the Gates Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Much appreciated. We're going to hand over in 1 second to Barbara Wells to say some closing remarks. But as she is talking, please could you type in the chat, what actions would you like to see from this webinar? So as Barbara talks, perhaps you could share already, post in the chat, what 2 actions, or if there's 1 action, would you like to see? So I would like to just hand over now to Barbara Wells. She is the Director General of the International Potato Center. And as of, I think, last week, she is the Global Director of Genetic Innovation in the CGIAR. So here you see some of these innovations happening. Barbara, over to you to wrap us all up and send us away happy.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. And first of all, I would like to thank all of our participants on what's truly been intriguing and stimulating conversation about the role of innovation in agriculture. It has been a privilege to have so many illustrious thinkers representing such eminent organizations. I will have to say, when Hugo and I and the team at SIP first began to speak about bringing us together, it's really an honor to be at this moment that this seminar has now brought so many great innovations and thinkers together, and very, very stimulating conversation. We had several organizations, including CIMIT, SIP, and East West Seed, who have been recipients of the World Food Prize. Also the World Food Program, who was a recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize last year, and also honored with representatives of the Syngenta Foundation, Cornell University, and the African Development Bank. So we did hear today that innovation is often taken for granted as part of a process of an R&D process. But technologies which remain on the shelf are by no means innovations. Rather, as we have heard many times, innovation needs to be approached and measured by how it benefits the people we serve. And we really do need to start from what is demand driven. What is it that our customers need as we look to find innovations that truly improve the lives of smallholder farmers in vulnerable communities? And I really wanted to emphasize also in my closing comments, not only in rural environments, but also in urban environments around the world. So this point is deceptively simple, and it is the reason that we gathered here today. But by changing our research mindset to focus on the beneficiaries, which we can affect the revolutionary change in agriculture for the world. And indeed, as was mentioned earlier as well, the timing of this webinar is extremely appropriate as we transition from the 1CG in support of our global efforts to build a much better delivery value through our R4D. We've heard many great examples today about the involving our stakeholders in the process, and not only in crop, but also livestock breeds and raising livestock, which brings so much protein to nutrition, as well as fish production. And this work has helped us understand the needs of farmers, particularly women farmers and consumers. By producing climate smart and high performing crop varieties, it just simply isn't enough. To be adopted, they must meet the real needs. And this has meant our processes may take longer and some may fail, and that's okay. But it's important, as Ugo has said, to fail intelligently along the way, to have the right stage gating processes in place. We heard also about choosing the right partners along the innovation process. And we not only need to choose the right partners, but choose the right partners at the right time. And I don't mean that this is for us to choose, it's really for our customers to really develop what is that network of partners that we need from the very beginning of the process to delivering of the products. You heard a couple of our speakers speak about the orange flesh sweet potato and the fact that as that product was being developed, we involved not only farmers, we had to involve the healthcare providers, we had to involve the leaders of the villages in the process, the national research partners to produce the healthier foods, and also to make sure that those products were on the table of the communities and the farmers that we were helping develop. And there's also the opportunity of the private sector, not only to provide business opportunities and nutritional foods in rural communities, but there's opportunity to continue to expand that within urban environments. So we heard just this tremendous example of the World Food Program where we were shared the story in Kenya where we generated $120 million worth of biofortified sweet potato and another 25 million in sales to local retailers. And this is just a huge success. It's a highly nutritious, it's income generating, and it's the whole package that we're able to deliver. So staying focused on the introduction of innovations, meeting stakeholders' needs, has broadened the intervention from biofortified sweet potato to the greater diet diversity that we are focused on in this changing world, of course. So in closing, thoughts for today are, innovation is at the heart of the 1CG. And as we move forward, I have been honored, as Peter just expressed, to be appointed as the Global Director of Genetic Innovation. And much of the subject of today put me personally reflecting a lot in innovation in genetics and that end user demand of products, the incorporating everything we do in a much better way along the value chain with all of the partners. So my very special thanks to Haley, Ann, to Lauren, to Marianne, to Vivian, Jonas, Marco, Bram, Ugo, and Graham, and Peter as well. But I think this was a hugely successful webinar. It was a real pleasure to be asked to close the session. But as Marco mentioned on several moments along the way, I think we have many subjects that will take on a webinar subjects of their own. And in the end, we have to deliver on our promises of scalable innovations that make an impact, and not only to smallholder farmers, but to rural and urban communities that we target to improving their lives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. So we're a few minutes over time. Thank you very much for staying with us. Thank you also to the organizers and the people behind the scenes and our interpreters. This is the end of the webinar. I believe there will be further communications. We'll be hearing more from the organizers. There's plans to disseminate the key points. So thank you all for your participation. The chat was great. We'll be following up. Thank you so much. Is there going to be music now? I don't know what happens next. There was music at the beginning. So maybe there's music now as we lead out. But thanks, everybody. It was great.
Thanks, everyone.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.